Imagine, if you will, a world where your morning cup of tea is interrupted not by the weather forecast or a charming segment about a water skiing squirrel, but by the sound of a government policy shattering into 1,000 pieces on national television. That is exactly what happened this week when the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, stepped into the BBC breakfast studio thinking she was in for a gentle chat about growing the economy. Instead, she found herself in the middle of a verbal demolition derby. The topic: Labour's latest Olympic-level backflip on mandatory digital IDs. It was not just a questioning, it was a forensic dissection that left the government's credibility looking like a block of Swiss cheese, mostly holes and very difficult to swallow. Quick favour, if you are loving this breakdown of the absolute circus in Westminster, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of viewers haven't actually subscribed yet, which is a statistic even more shocking than a Treasury forecast. It is completely free, takes just a second, and it means the world to us here at Mets Uncovered. Thanks if you did. Now back to the show.
Talking about support for pubs, but so far 13 U-turns in just 18 months. How can the British public trust a word that your government says?
So look, I don't accept that list that you read out to me and the characterisation of them being U-turns. If you take our decision, for example, to lift the 2-child cap in universal credit, as soon as we came into government, we set up a child poverty task force to look at what we could do to sort the situation out where children are growing up in poverty in what is one of the richest countries in the world. So that's not a U-turn. You mentioned WASPy as well. Look, I remember, it wasn't in our manifesto, I remember talking very openly with my constituents, well, they weren't my constituents at that point in time because I was merely a candidate, saying and explaining to them the financial pressures that the government was under and saying I didn't think that we were going to be in a position to be able to pay compensation to those women. And I know that there will be a lot of people who are watching your show that would have liked us to do that. With respect to the point you were making at the beginning of the conversation about digital ID cards, we're still rolling out digital ID. What we have said is that there will still be a mandatory digital right to work check. Now that might be using the free digital ID that the government is going to roll out, or it might be a digital check on, say, an e-visa or on a biometric chip on a passport. It's really important that we move away from this paper-based system that we've got at the moment. It's a complete mishmash. There's no digitised records. That makes it really hard to target the enforcement activity that we need to do to get raids going on businesses that are employing people illegally. So that's why the government is still committed to a mandatory digital check on an individual's right to work.
The atmosphere in the studio was electric, and not in the green energy revolution kind of way. Sally Nugent and John Kay didn't just ask questions, they held up a mirror to a government that seems to be suffering from a permanent case of vertigo. The centrepiece of this morning's carnage was the spectacular climb down on digital ID cards. Only a few months ago, Sir Keir Starmer stood behind a lectern looking very serious as he does and told the nation that digital IDs would be mandatory. He said, and I quote, "You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID." It was presented as the silver bullet for illegal migration, the high-tech shield of our borders. Fast forward to this week, and suddenly the mandatory part has been quietly escorted out the back door. When Rachel Reeves tried to play this off as a minor tweak, Sally Nugent went straight for the jugular. She reeled off a list of U-turns so long it could have doubled as a CVS receipt. We are talking about the 2-child benefit cap, the grooming gangs inquiry, welfare reform, the winter fuel payment raid, and the inheritance tax grab on farmers. It was a relentless barrage of why do you keep changing your mind? Reeves looked like someone trying to explain why they've returned their 3rd pair of shoes to the shop in a week. Defensive, slightly flustered, and increasingly relaxed in a way that suggests she is actually anything but. The Chancellor's defence was a masterclass in what we might call creative linguistics. She claimed the story had been overwritten, which is political speak for stop reporting on things we actually said. She insisted the government is pretty relaxed about what form the digital ID takes. But here is the kicker. John Kay wasn't having any of it. He pointed out that the Prime Minister certainly wasn't relaxed when he was wagging his finger at the public just weeks ago. It is a classic Labour move, sell it as a revolution on Monday, and by Friday pretend it was just a casual suggestion that everyone got a bit too excited about. This brings us to the broader problem of directionless Labour. When you change your mind this often, you aren't a leader, you are a weather vane in a hurricane. Relatable analogy time. Imagine you've hired a builder to renovate your house. On Monday he says the walls must be blue. On Tuesday he says blue is actually illegal and we're going with brick. By Wednesday he is pretty relaxed about whether the house even has walls. At some point you stop caring about the design and start wondering if the man has ever seen a blueprint in his life. That is exactly how the British public feels right now. The confidence of both the voters and the backbenchers is being shaken like a martini in the hands of James Bond.
You said we will ensure taxes on working people are kept as low as possible. Labour will not increase taxes on working people. You go on to say, which is why we will not increase national insurance, the basic, higher or additional rates of income tax or VAT. So compare and contrast that, what you're saying about your budget, which is we're asking ordinary people to pay a little more. These are two entirely different statements.
Well, I recognise that freezing thresholds does mean that we're asking ordinary people to contribute a bit more. That's happening from 2028. Those are the changes we made yesterday. But I've kept the contribution to a minimum by changes elsewhere.
The fallout from this digital ID retreat is massive. Support for the scheme has plummeted from 53% to just 31%. Why? Because people hate being told something is an absolute necessity, only for the government to admit it was actually optional the moment they saw a grumpy tweet. It's what commentators are calling the Starmer reverse Midas effect, taking a policy that might have had some common sense appeal and turning it into a toxic mess of confusion. And let us not forget the timing. This U-turn comes just as the government is also retreating on pub business rates and inheritance tax for farmers. It is a wholesale liquidation of their original agenda. Reeves' performance on the BBC was a symptom of a much deeper malaise. When asked how the public can have faith in a government that backtracks every other Tuesday, her response was to pivot to a script about growing the economy. It is the political equivalent of "I know I crashed your car, but look at how fast the engine was going before the impact." But trust is a currency, and the Reeves-Starmer Treasury is currently experiencing hyperinflation. If the plan is always subject to change, then there is no plan. There is only a series of reactions to the latest focus group.
Is it just me, or is something not adding up about Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer? She cried her eyes out in full view of the world in Parliament. Sir Keir Starmer then refused to back her. There are a few things about this that just don't add up for me. Sir Keir Starmer was asked why he didn't comfort her in the Commons.
I didn't appreciate what was happening because, as you'll probably appreciate, the PMQs is pretty wired.
Let's just think about this logically. So in order for that to be true, I think the Prime Minister is asking you to believe that he is the most oblivious man in Britain. He didn't notice what was going on right next to him. Now, I don't want to be insensitive, okay, but isn't it a bit convenient to say that the reason that she looked like this was because of a personal issue that she will refuse to talk about? And then you come out like this, oh, all smiles, and you expect us to believe that everything's absolutely fine, and you are the kind of person that we can trust with our economy, even though it's in the toilet, thanks to a lot of her decisions. I'm sorry, I'm not really buying it. I'm not, and I don't think a lot of people are. We were told it was because she'd had a row with the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. Then we were told she'd had a row with Angela Rayner. And we were told that she said she was under a lot of pressure, and that was the problem. And now we're being told to believe that she's had a personal issue, which meant that she went to pieces in the Commons, but now everything's absolutely fine. If there is some serious personal issue here, then OK, all right, and I do feel sorry for her. But unfortunately for her and Keir Starmer, this Labour government has a track record of not being very honest. And I wonder whether or not they're being honest about this.
The internal rumblings are getting louder too. Even former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett, hardly a rebel, blasted the government for a failure to enunciate why this policy mattered. When you lose the people who actually want the policy to work, you know you are in trouble. Backbenchers are reportedly exasperated, with some questioning if the government is in freefall. It feels like a complete shambles, to quote one anonymous MP, who clearly hasn't quite mastered the art of being pretty relaxed about the collapse of their party's credibility. So, where do we go from here? The government is desperately trying to scrape the barnacles off the boat, but at this rate, there won't be much boat left. By watering down the digital ID, they have admitted that their primary weapon against illegal working was essentially a prop. If an e-passport or an e-visa is enough, then why did we spend months being told we needed a BRIC card? It is a U-turn wrapped in an enigma and deep-fried in incompetence. The BBC interview didn't just expose a policy change, it exposed a vacuum of conviction. When a host as seasoned as Sally Nugent or John Kay can effectively disassemble the Chancellor's talking points in real time, it shows that the narrative has completely escaped the government's control. They are no longer telling the story, they are being chased by it. And in the world of British politics, once the media realises you're a backtracker, they never let go of the scent. As we look ahead to the local elections in May, the pressure is mounting. The public is getting motion sickness from the constant reversals. Labour promised stability, but what they've delivered is a high-speed spin cycle. The Northern Powerhouse rail announcement, the digital ID climb down, the tax raids. It is a dizzying array of contradictions. If Rachel Reeves thinks she can just smile and say she is relaxed while her flagship policies are being towed away by the scrap man, she is in for a very rude awakening. Thank you for watching. Good day.